Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about what Future of Life Institute has been up to along the lines of this session. And then there are a couple of initiatives and projects that I would love to get feedback on, and of course, talk about anything else you want. Sorry. So Future of Life, we've been around much younger than the Foresight Institute. 2014 we started, and we really trying to develop this two-sided mission of thinking about transformative technology especially, but avoiding large-scale extreme risks like catastrophic and existential risk, but also have a positive side, like what are the futures that we want to sort of aim ourselves towards. And I've broken this down into a few questions for this talk. What do we want to avoid? That's kind of easy in a sense, like pretty easy to think of ways that the world can go off the rails. We're thinking about them a lot, watching them unfold. A little bit harder, what would be nice, what would be a good way for the world to be along those different axes. This is, as Beatrice said, is like harder than you think. We tend to carry around this kind of vague ideas of a good future, but it's surprisingly hard to make that concrete in your mind. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the way I've been thinking about this a lot is what institutions do we need to steer away from the first or the second? And I mean not just organizational institutions, but like social institutions, like platforms, like treaties or sort of agreements or social constructs and so on, things that we can put in place that will help us steer away from the less and toward the good. So what we want to avoid, I think you'll probably have to click through a bunch of these because I put a bunch on. The obvious ones, the nuclear war, the AI hard takeover. We worry about slaughter plot proliferation, a soft takeover by AI. I think we're due for an epistemic apocalypse in the next couple of years. It's like imminent. Dystopia, I didn't put the cooked earth. I ran out of room before the cooked earth got on here from global warming. So there's a lot, and a lot of us like have these in mind and know that they're going on. And they're satisfying in the sense that you feel like for a lot of them, it's hard to get done what you need to do to prevent them from happening, but you kind of feel like you know what the problem is, and you have some ideas at least about what to do, like slaughter bots. I know roughly what the problem is. They could be a new WMD, they could be proliferating all over the place, assassinations, wars, blah, blah, blah. It's hard to figure out what to do about them, but there are like some pretty obvious ideas. Similarly with but the problems are fairly clear. Now, if we think about the next slide, what would be nice? I think there's easy parts of this question and hard parts. So it's when you sit down and imagine what hell is like, it's like super easy, right? Like almost anything. Like mildly unpleasant if you do it like forever is pretty bad, and then you can go all kinds of places with what can make it very unpleasant. If you try to imagine what's a good heaven, it's like not so easy. Like what does not get boring, what does not what is really stays fulfilling, all these things are quite difficult. And I think of this as kind of like an entropy problem. The class of worlds that are desirable to people is just very, very, very small compared to the class of like the set of all possible worlds that we might have. And we're very particular as biological beings and as conscious beings. Nonetheless, I think there's some it's not as hard as it may seem sometimes. So this is like sort of the world's version of what we would like to have happen. So this is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is kind of like the most consensus process we can get for like what would be desirable in the future. And they're pretty simple things like no poverty. Like, yeah, if we had no poverty, that would be like a big win. I mean, if everybody in the world had the lifestyle that we have, like basically material, like satisfaction, we get to sit around and have fun conversations like this with our time and so on. Huge win, right? So there are lots of things like this, and they've got 17 of them and specific targets for them. So there's actually quite a bit of consensus on what would be like pretty good, but there's a lot when you delve into the details of like what does that world look like, and what does the social structures look like? A lot of these are kind of economic and physical things. What do the social structures look like? What does the technology and how it interacts with people look like? It gets much more complicated, and I think much less clear, and we then have this foggy notion. So it's something we tried to do with Future of Life Institute. The next slide is probably in there. Is try to do some pretty concrete envisioning. So Beatrice mentioned the world building contest. That's something we launched with a particular aim of thinking about a world that had strong AI in it, AI that's developed around like before 2040, and we're talking about the world in 2045. So we gave out this prompt to think about, and you can go to the next one. What a positive but plausible world would look like in 2045 with strong AI and a few other assumptions, and just put it out there with some cashola behind it to provide a lot of extra encouragement. And we got a huge response given that the burden was pretty high. So we asked people to make this timeline for like events every year that happened, like indicators and like numbers that go along with it, answer a whole bunch of questions, create 2 creative pieces written and 1 creative piece that was not written. So like quite a bit of work, and most people entered with teams. The actual winner was just one guy in New Zealand, which is pretty impressive. But we got like 140 something, I think, entries altogether. And you can, I strongly encourage you to go to worldbuild.ai and just check out the winning entries. They're quite fun to read. So one of the things I'd love to talk to people about is what to do next with this initiative. I can tell you a little bit more about it. It's like, we've got all these people that are excited about it. We've got these teams that entered. We've got this set of data that we took. What should we do with that next? So next slide. So one of the things that was quite cool, and Anna, who really made this happen at FLI, gave an awesome talk about this at the other Foresight, was that we had an incredibly heroic person who read, I think, the top 50 and just dissected them completely, like figured out which things were elements of which ones, like how many of them had self-driving cars, how many of them had unipolar AI scenario, multipolar, all this stuff. So they performed this saintly labor. Maybe next year we'll do it in GPT-4, but for now it's a human that had to do it. And I think, so we saw a lot of emerging things from that. I would say just reading a bunch of the top entries, there are some things that were common to a lot of the entries in terms of what does it look like to have this positive aspirational world. It had things like, obviously, AI and AGI had to not go off the rails. This is a positive world with AI. So it had to have some kind of robust, effective governance environment. Well-respected individual rights and autonomy. So people didn't obviously want to be like in a dystopian slave state or, totalitarian state. A lot of them were about high and widespread and for equitable economic wealth. So this is something that is a pretty big no-brainer. Nonetheless, the general dynamics of our economic systems tend to not make that happen by themselves, even though everybody wants it. And people argue that there's a trade-off between high and equitable, but whether that's true or not, it's an open question. But if we can get really high, then we'll have to let it. A lot of attention was on health and longevity. People think about what AI can really do for us in a positive way. This is a big one, right? Science, like it can do a lot of stuff. Like if it can do science, where does that science really help people? If people want more healthy, long lives, and so on. Totally reasonable. Reduction in global conflicts, I think we see that as kind of necessary because we're now getting to the stage where large-scale global conflicts are a catastrophic or potential risk. Then this is a bit of a mouthful, but how do we, we've got all these institutions now for preference aggregation and like understanding we've got like a news system that people go out and take pictures and they put them in news articles, and then we all read the news articles on Twitter, and then people yell at each other on Twitter. Like, is that That's not the greatest collective sense making and preference aggregation system. It used to be a little bit different. It used to be like news articles and newspapers, and then we talked about them over like our dinner tables or whatever with our friends, and then we went and voted. So we have these systems that exist, but they're not really that great, I would say. So there are now technologies that I think can make those a lot better. And so can we put those in place before everything sort of falls apart socially, so that we really have good methods of kind of as a species or as a society doing the things that an individual creature does, of sensing its world, understanding its world, having goals, making decisions, and like having agency. And it's also, I think, important that that isn't just human-centered, that other species and ecosystems in the natural world. So these were just kind of common things that I sort of drew out of that. And it's kind of hard to argue that much for these, right? Like, who really wants a world that doesn't have these things? So, again, at some level, the specifics get quite difficult, and there are thorny questions, like culture war kind of questions, certainly, and all kinds of other things that we'd like to fight about. But there's lots that we can all get on the same page. So just to say a little bit about the Future of Life Institute and what we're doing. We've got some major projects going on. A lot of these are kind of X-risk reduction, I would say. Worrying about AI and worrying about nuclear weapons, worrying about lethal autonomous weapons, worrying about high-powered AI and whether it's governed and regulated enough. We've got a podcast. We've got the Future of Life Award that we've given out for people who have avoided catastrophe or large-scale risk. If you're interested in nuclear war, there's a nuclear war research. Reducing the risk of it. There's a nuclear war like outcomes open. Well, actually, that's not open anymore. Forget I said anything. We just closed all the proposals. So, but there will be outcomes from that are coming out. So these are kind of the things that Future of Life Institute, as an organization itself, is kind of actively doing. But then next slide. Oh no! They're all unreadable. Okay, sorry, I don't know what happened there. I made them all black, but anyway. So the thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how FLI can create new organizations and new institutions, as I said. And the reason I'm interested in this is because a lot of institutions come into being like in a reactive way, like there's a big problem, and so things come into being to help try to solve it. And that's great, but often that's too late. Like the problem is there, or like things are sort of baked in already at the level where creating a new way of doing it is just like can't get any traction. So there are problems where you have to be early, and you have to like have some sort of solution or some sort of thing that can deal with the problem before the problem gets big. Now, there's a risk to this, which is you can solve problems that never actually get big or turn out to be a problem. So some of these could end up being sort of a waste of time, but I think there's a sort of unexplored area of proactively thinking about which things are going to be issues in a negative way or which things are opportunities in a positive way, that we can put in place things now where it's relatively easy to put them in place and like have them there when we want them. So that's kind of the philosophy that I've been taking. There are several that Future of Life has in some sense or other incubated so far. So I'll count Metaculus because I helped found out that and that really did, was the flip side of Future of Life. I was thinking if we want to affect the future, well, we kind of need to know what it is and what happens if we do one thing or the other. So Metaculus is one. Improve the News is one that you may not have heard about, but I encourage you to look it up. It's a great way to consume the news because it tells you sort of separates what actually happened from the various different spins that are put on it. And it's kind of enjoyable. And they put a lot of work into figuring out how to sort of imbibe the news, aggregate it into the different stories and different axes, isolate the things that everybody agrees on happened, and then the things that there are these different worlds. This one is on AI policy, how to like get more worry into the governments about catastrophic risk, primarily AI. The Biocomplexity Survival Alliance is a new one. This is focused on the problem that we're basically erasing the enormous amount of biological information, the genetic information, and other ecological information that nature spent 4 billion years generating, and we're like dragging it into the trash can. So let's not do that. But if, to the extent that we're doing it anyway, let's make a backup copy to the degree that we can. So that's what that one's about, and it's blockchain connected in various ways. It will have NFTs, and it will, I think, have a blockchain way of tracing which species, which genetic information is coming in from where, which species are being saved from who, and all that stuff. So that's ambitious. Karma is an AI policy and strategy research organization. It's the one that gets the black letters because it's the one that's going to save us all, I guess. Windfall Trust is something which is very much about this equitable distribution. So if there is a sort of windfall, like a giant sort of economic catastrophe caused by AI generating lots of value, how do we make sure that that doesn't just go to Google or the people that live in the U.S. that can tax Google maybe and redistribute it to them, but the people in Mozambique, how are they ever going to see any of that wealth? I think that's not going to happen by default. So it's an idea for that. Critical number, I'm very interested in like new coordination mechanisms. This is just one that I would like to get going. That's anonymous assurance contracts. I've given talks on this at Foresight. The idea is just that something that you can sign up to a statement and say, release my signing on to the statement and my identity once enough people have signed on to the statement. Or it can be an assurance contract that like goes into effect when enough people have signed on to it. This is a mechanism that has kind of existed, but not really. Cryptography now makes this something that we can really do. There's been a lot of talk about this in the blockchain space, but nothing really out there that's doing this well. I would love to get that. I've been thinking a lot about what it means for an AI system to be loyal and empowering to the people that use it. This is something that is not really baked into the AI systems we have now that are primarily loyal and empowering to the companies that make them and not to the people that are using them. So that's something that I would like to put some effort into. And this one, I have a terrible name for, SendPlan, which is, I would really like to, and I'd love to get ideas about this, and I talked about this with all of you, think about how we could do scenario planning or and sort of future mapping at scale using new technology. So I think, Metaculus is now a way that I think we can take individual events that might happen in the future and get reliable or the most reliable possible probabilities for them. But all those questions at the moment, Metaculus, are independent of each other, except for a few conditional questions we've now. But the term Metaculus was really points to a probability map of the world. That's where the name comes from. I would really like to see that happen, but more than that, see a sort of scenario planning for the world where you can imagine not just like, in scenario planning classically, you think of like, here's a scenario, here's another one, like here's a third one. Let's think about those three scenarios. I would like to think about millions of scenarios and do Monte Carlo simulations on them and like statistics on them and all that kind of stuff. So I would love to hear I'd love to gather information on what technologies are out there, people who have been thinking about this, like people must have tried to build things like this in the past and either did and have them or failed and reasons why. So I'd love to just talk about that. And also, these are just some ideas. There's lots more on our idea list and other people have ideas. So this is something that I see FLI doing more of in the future, kind of research and development of new potential like platforms and institutions and so on, and incubating them and trying to get them funded and trying to coordinate them afterwards. So if you've got ideas for those.
So I just want to flag that if you could
Are we past time? I think that
no, if you could wrap up in like 2 or 3 minutes, so we have time for questions also.
yep, I think the next slide is the last one.
Great.
So on that last slide, the things that are personally vexing me at the moment, and trying to bring those into being are, it's very hard to find people just to start organizations and do it well, right? We all know this, but you really start to feel it when you try to get organizations started and realize like you've got the idea, you've got the resources, and there's nobody to run it, and it just sits there forever. I would love to have someone just to talk or hire as a consultant on actual cryptography, not cryptocurrency, but actual crypto. Several of these projects and a bunch of other ones have real crypto ingredients, and I'm not a crypto person. And again, like I said, scenario planning platform and technical expertise. So lots of people have done scenario planning like by hand, and I think that's a sort of well-developed technology, but doing it at scale and like quantitatively, I think it's not as far as I know. So I'm lots of
Great. Thank you so much. That's so exciting. Okay, question.
Yes, sir. Would you find some organization for ideas example like this?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question. I think it's most useful if they tie in a little bit to the ones that already exist. You know, in the sense that I think we're trying to build something of a network, and so synergies with the other things, and having those be demonstrable in some way is useful. I think they have to fit certainly the FLI mission of sort of avoiding large-scale technological risk, and trying to. So they have to, at some level, have to do with transformative technology and avoiding risk. But that's pretty vague, right? Like making the world less bad and more good. Like most people can come up with a response to that. So yeah, I would say they have to be like pretty clearly mission aligned and preferably fit into the network. And it's good if they're scalable in the sense of like there being a first stage which can be started by a handful of people, like startup meet, see how it goes, and if it's really successful, start to grow it. So yeah, that may not be that useful. Yeah, I don't know.
So my background's more on the policy side of things. So when I see a lot of these ideas, I get interested in wondering, what is the reception or the attitude like when it comes to working with governments? It's not that you work in this, AI policy and regulation. Do you find that they're responsive, that they're cooperative, that you have to really get their attention? How is this conversation?
Yeah, so on that side, I've been surprised at how receptive governments have been, which is a separate question from whether they're able to actually like do anything. So whether they're like dysfunctional. So the U.S. like lawmaking system is totally dysfunctional at the moment. So it's very difficult to get anything like pass at law in the U.S. Although it might sort of get along. We'll see. In the U.S., everything that passes in the law has to be in the National Defense Authorization Act. Basically, it's just a terrible thing, but it's true. That's the one bill that gets passed every year. So it's shoehorning it into that. In the EU, it's totally different. They make laws, and there's actually a very mature policy making apparatus, and it's been quite interesting to work with it. Yeah, and they're concerned about sort of the right things. I mean, they take cues from experts. They have their own complicated internal dynamics with the EU and all the different countries. But I would say there's definitely an openness to it. There's a desire in policymaking circles to they're not all just listening to the corporate lobbyists. Like there are lots of people there that want to do things because they're good for the country and good for the people. And having AI, do antisocial or disruptive or unsafe things is not really good for anybody. So there's definitely an appetite for hearing about that. There's a realism for what can be done in the U.S. In terms of hard regulation. We don't have a really good system for having hard regulations on most things, at least not in technology. So we have NIST, this voluntary framework in the U.S. We have a law in the EU that's coming into being. Unsurprisingly, lots of AI companies are paying attention to the EU Act rather than the NIST one, because one is voluntary and one is hard law. So go figure. But yeah, I've been actually pleasantly surprised at at least the intention of the policymakers to do the right thing, whether they actually can, whether it's a mess, and so on.
I'm very curious. It struck me that one of your goals with the world open competition was really to put out positive features to a wider audience.
Yes.
And so kind of create potential issues for the future. And I'm wondering if you feel like the competition is successful in that aspect and how and if those have gotten to potentially a broader audience.
Yeah, great question. So I would say, yes, that's definitely part of the intent. I would say it hasn't done it yet in the sense of like the number of people who have gone to the website, they're big kind of hard to consume pieces. So we're definitely thinking about how to get a wider audience. So we're making films and podcasts right now out of the winning world. So those are going to have a wider audience. We've also been thinking about how we can get them into more mass media. So we ran a screenwriting contest. It was a disaster. I honestly have to say, like the things that they wrote were like bad. So we have to circle around and rethink that, like what went wrong there. I think the screenwriters just didn't have the right background and understanding to really, so they needed to like actually pay attention to the world builds that were there instead of writing their own. And they didn't. The people who ran the contest won't say it was bad. So a better version of that, and then hopefully more like a film, like how can we get like really in-depth built worlds turned into screenplays, turned into movies. So it's like out there in the media more, not particular visions, but the fact that there exists future visions of the world that are good. And that like utopia isn't like stupid and naive and starry-eyed and like us reasonable people prefer dystopian futures, because we're grown-ups.
Context, I was a finalist in the boat building competition. I'm wondering if there's anything that like I could do to help with that, or if there are, ways that I might be able to share that world.
Yeah, well, you should tell me. I would love to figure out what to do next. I mean, some things we've thought about are just building new teams out of the existing finalists or entrants and commissioning bigger, more detailed worlds. A meeting, like we'll probably have a big meeting with the people who are finalists or entrants. But I'm open to all sorts of ideas. We've got a few, but we haven't really settled on like exactly.
I have to catch here,
Okay.
but thank you so much, Anthony.